Hey, want a cookie? Oh, I know you just ate, so you're craving something a little sweet. Besides, one cookie isn't gonna kill you. How about half? Just a bite? Bite it. Bite it. Bite it.
Food noise isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. Your affordable GLP-1 source that puts you on a path to successful weight loss by quieting food noise.
Bite it.
Shh. Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
Hello, your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley, back again for another episode of History of Comic Books, this time with Part 2, The Life of Frank Miller. When we last left off, Frank Miller had ascended from a starving New York artist to one of the biggest superstars in the comic book industry in the 1980s, and would go into the 1990s carrying that, basically able to write his own ticket, for better or worse. Thanks to his success as a comic book writer in the 1980s, Frank Miller was hired to write the sequels to the successful RoboCop movie, with both 2 and 3. However, he eventually hated the work as it kept him from drawing for 2 years. Plus, after the producers mangled his scripts, Miller would swirl off Hollywood for years. To paraphrase Miller, he described a writer's screenplay like a fire hydrant every dog in Hollywood got to pee on. Frank Miller would eventually return to the character, overseeing a comic book adaptation of his original script with Frank Miller's RoboCop, a 9-issue miniseries published by Avatar Press from July of 2003 to January of 2006, which would ultimately receive mixed reviews, though frankly much better than those RoboCops 2 and 3. Frank Miller also returned to work on RoboCop again in comic book form with the miniseries RoboCop vs. the Terminator at Dark Horse on May 1st, 1992, with Walter Simonson providing the art. The 4-issue series merged the 2 franchises together with the revelation that the technology that made RoboCop would eventually create the Terminators, to the point that Skynet sent 3 Terminators back in time to protect them. The comic would even be adapted into a video game for Super Nintendo and Genesis in 1993, with Electronic Gaming Monthly calling the Genesis version the bloodiest game of the year. Naturally, Nintendo's version was toned down. March of 1990, Frank Miller did Elektra Lives Again for Marvel's Epic imprint as a 96-page graphic novel. The story involved Matt Murdock Daredevil believing Elektra has been resurrected and trying to get to the bottom of it. The comic was another experiment with Miller that once again had him team with his wife Lynn Varley, who provided the colors. In 1990, Frank Miller worked on Hard Boiled with Jeff Darrow, the 3-issue miniseries that was published from September of 1990 to March of 1992, about an insurance investigator in the near-dystopian future Los Angeles who discovers all is not what he believes. For the comic, Miller originally intended the series to be a drama, but once he got Darrow's art back, he decided to change it to a comedy due to its exaggerated and highly detailed panels. Despite this change in the highly erratic release schedule, as you can tell from the dates, it took 3 years to produce 3 comics. Hardboiled was highly praised for both his writing and art, and even received a video game adaptation in 1997 for the PlayStation. Around that same time, Frank Miller worked with Dave Gibbons on Give Me Liberty. It came about at a high time for both, as Miller was coming off The Dark Knight Returns, and Gibbons was coming off The Watchmen. And as Miller would put it, they were both pretty high on themselves at the time. The 4-issue miniseries was released in 1990 under Dark Horse Comics, telling the story of Martha Washington, a black woman who grows up in a dystopian future America that has been split into several extremist factions, eventually becoming a war hero. Designed as a political satire, Miller especially liked having a black woman becoming the Captain America of this story as a commentary on race and sex in America. It would be a huge seller for Dark Horse, eventually becoming one of the highest-selling independent books of all time. Naturally, with such success, several sequels and one-shots followed up, with the first being a 5-issue miniseries in 1994, Martha Washington Goes to War, which was inspired by Ayn Rand's classic novel Atlas Shrugged. Eventually, Dark Horse would release a 600-page collected edition, The Life and Times of Martha Washington, in 2009. The biggest reaction to Frank Miller's aborted attempt at Hollywood as a screenwriter was Sin City, which was his passion project about finally doing the crime comic book he always wanted to do. As Miller put it, he wanted to draw a comic book his own way, and in the crime noir world of Sin City, the women are beautiful, the guns are huge, the trench coats are long, and the cars are vintage. For the series, he would make it black and white to capture the classic crime noir feel, while also heavily referencing his favorite crime writers like Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, and Mickey Spillane, setting it in the fictional city of Basin Sin City, where even the most virtuous people have a dark side. The The first story appeared in Dark Horse Presents' 5th Anniversary Special in April of 1991, and would later appear in the Dark Horse Presents numbers 51 to 62 from June of 1991 to the June of 1992, telling the story of Marv, a simple but near superhuman bruiser who tries to solve the murder of a woman he had not had a one-night stand with. It would eventually be collected in a trade paperback called Sin City later that year and then subtitled The Hard Goodbye in the 1993 edition, with Miller receiving numerous Eisner nominations and wins, notably the Best Graphic Novel reprint in 1993. Miller wasn't just telling a hardcore crime story, though, but pushing new areas of his storytelling, such as having the word sound effects like blam incorporated into lighting effects as well. It was an exciting new world for Frank Miller, and naturally, sequels would follow. The first sequel, along with the first of the Sin City comics to appear in its own series, was A Dame to Kill For, a 6-issue miniseries that was published from November of 1993 to May of 1994. This time shifting the focus to Dwight, a private eye who finds himself drawn back into the dangerous world of his ex, Ava, with deadly consequences. It was a classic crime noir story with plenty of plot twists, along with featuring an appearance by Marv from The Hard Goodbye, thus establishing it part of the larger Sin City universe. The series was another critical and commercial success for Miller, winning the Eisner for Best Limited Series in 1995, and for many, the highlight of the entire Sin City run. Frank Miller would follow up A Dame to Kill For with The Big Fat Kill, a 5-issue miniseries published from November of 1994 to March of 1995, a direct sequel that finds Dwight trying to cover up the death of a corrupt cop to help his friends, which also would win the Eisner for Best Limited Series in 1996. Next up was That Yellow Bastard, a 6-issue limited series from February to July of 1996, this time starring the disgraced cop Harrigan as he tries to save an old friend from the mysterious Yellow Bastard, which would also be the first time Miller would use color in the black and white comic. Yet another critical and commercial success, it would win the Eisner for Best Graphic Novel reprint in 1998. That same year, Frank Miller produced the 128 graphic novel Family Values, which had Dwight returning to solve a murder, and this would win the Harvey for the Best Original Graphic Novel. Next in the Sin City series was Booze, Broads, and Bullets, a collection of one-shots in the universe, and finally, To Hell and Back, a 9-issue limited series that ran from July of 1999 to April of 2000, which was subtitled A Sin City Love Story, about Wallace, a decorated war veteran who stops a woman named Esther from committing suicide, only have to then rescue her if she is kidnapped by some mysterious gangsters. At this point, Miller was going overboard a bit, including a full-color hallucination sequence that featured cameos from RoboCop to Captain America. Frank Miller hasn't touched on Sin City since, at least in comic book form, though the series remains influential among Klein Comics and has been recollected numerous times, most recently in the hardcover edition, Frank Miller's Big Damn Sin City, a hardcover which collects the entire run. While Frank Miller was busy doing creator-owned work like Sin City during much of the 1990s, he still found time for other work outside with other companies, such as when he returned to Daredevil in 1993 with Daredevil, The Man Without Fear, at Marvel, with John Romita Jr. providing the art, which retold Daredevil's origin. Originally envisioned as a graphic novel, it eventually expanded to a 5-issue miniseries that revamped Daredevil's origin, expanding on both the Stick and Elektra stories in Matt Murdock's past. It was another standout in Miller's career, along with being a breakthrough for Romita Jr. as an artist. He credits the series with finally capturing his gritty storytelling style. Like Miller's previous work on Daredevil, it will be heavily influenced on the future comics and their adaptations, notably the Netflix series of 2015, which originally had Daredevil sport a black costume very similar to the one Daredevil wears at the end of The Man Without Fear. Miller admitted it was one of the strangest projects he worked on, as Romita had broken it down visually before he even worked on the script, as he was busy with a television treatment at the time, thus the reason it went from being a graphic novel to a miniseries. Frank Miller also found work with two other upcoming companies in the 1990s, Image and Valiant. For Image, Miller wrote Spawn number 11 for the series creator Todd McFarlane, who provided the pencils, and the two would reteam again for Spawn Batman crossover in 1994, which found the two heroes teaming up to take on an army of cyborgs. According to Frank Miller, this story is actually set in the same one as The Dark Knight Returns. For Valiant Comics, he made a series of interlocking covers for the Unity crossover in 1992. In 1995, Frank Miller reteamed with Jeff Darrow again for Big Guy and Rusty, a 2-issue miniseries published from July to August of that year about Rusty the boy robot teaming with the giant robot Big Guy to take on a monster attacking Tokyo. Big Guy was a different path, as Miller would give Darrow notes for a 24-page story, and 100 pages later, he found himself with a lot more art to work with. While one of the more obscure properties for Miller and Darrow, the characters have made cameos throughout Miller's other work, such as in Martha Washington Goes to War and Sin City to Hell and Back. Plus, the comic was popular enough to warrant a Saturday morning cartoon show of the same name, which aired for 2 seasons and 26 episodes on Fox Kids from September of 18th, 1999 to March 5th, 2001. The series expanded on the Big Guy and Rusty story, revealing Big Guy is not actually a robot like Rusty, but piloted by Lieutenant Dwayne Hunter, who is kept secret so that it's not to overload Rusty's emotion circuits. The cartoon was favorably reviewed, especially in keeping with the look and story of the original comic. Plus, it is fun to see something Frank Miller and Jeff Darrow made into a Saturday morning cartoon show, showing the true range of their creative skills. At this point, Frank Miller's relationship with Dark Horse Comics had developed so much that he was one of the founders of their new imprint, Legend, from which Sin City was published under. His next work for the publisher was in 1998, when he made 300, a 5-issue miniseries that was fictionalized taking the Battle of Thermopylae, in which a force of 300 Spartans fought against a much larger Persian invasion army who was invading Greece in 480 BC. Published from May to September of 1998, it was based on the film The 300 Spartans, starring Richard Egan, from 1962. The film was a huge influence on Frank Miller as a kid, and he even visited the site of the battle, which he found not only extremely moving, noting a simple plaque commemorating the site, but also for research. He understood how the ground could be easily defended by a small army. As an adult, Miller admits the film is kind of clunky today, but the story of the Spartan self-sacrifice made a huge impact on Miller, and the comic would be his first historical work. Miller admitted to omitting certain facts about the Spartans for the story, since I mentioned they had slaves, so as not to turn off modern audiences. As a result, the series still received criticism for being historically inaccurate, but that was always Miller's intention. He previously hinted at this story in the pages of Sin City: The Big Fat Kill #5 back in 1995. 300 would be another hit for Frank Miller, earning the 3 Eisners for Best Limited Series, Best Writer Artist for Frank Miller, and Best Colors for Lynn Varley, who also provided the colors for the background of the film adaptation. Most significantly, the comic was adapted into a film in 2007 by director Zack Snyder, released on March 7th to critical and financial acclaim, though was once again criticized for being historically inaccurate. Ultimately, it would gross $456.1 million against a $65 million budget. The film was especially popular with fans admiring the adherence not just to the comic story, but also its look. As noticed, Lynn Varley provided the colors for the CGI backgrounds. And also with Snyder expertly using the green screen. Today is considered one of the best comic book adaptations ever, and for better or worse, is what convinced Warner Brothers to let Zack Snyder make The Watchmen and the Batman v Superman. The film also received a sequel, 300 Rise of an Empire, March 7 of 2014, taking place before and after the events of the first film, including the pivotal Battle of Salamis, when the combined Greek forces finally beat the Persian invasion. However, the film wasn't as widely praised as the original. During all this time, Frank Miller always had time for other works he especially loved, such as when he provided covers for the new Dark Horse reprints of The Lone Wolf and Cub, which the company reprinted in digest form, of which I proudly own all 28 volumes. To help with his work, Miller would create a 3D library, including 200 die-cast metal cars, prop guns, and even the clothes his characters wear. Frank Miller's taste in comic books had also moved away from the superhero fare, and instead he preferred books like Concrete, Bone, and Hellboy. While being critical of Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee's works, which he commented consisted of splash pages and no storytelling. In 2000, he did the Dark Horse Maverick 2000, which was a satire of environmentalism, which also was contributing to Superman Batman, World's Funniest, a one-shot by Evan Dorkin starring Mr. Mxyzptlk and Batmite, all while poking fun at the superheroes from the golden to the modern age. Being someone who always admired New York even as a kid, 9/11 would personally shape Frank Miller, and he and his wife Lynn even moved back after the attacks. Previously, Miller had a very jaundiced look at authority from both the right and the left, which was reflected in his work. For example, in The Dark Knight Returns, he mocks both Ronald Reagan and liberal psychologists. Miller was more of an individualist, though understood the complexities of freedom in his history, such as the Spartans being slaveholders while fighting from the oppression from the Persians. Frank Miller has openly stated also being an atheist, and his contribution to 9/11 Artists Respond Volume 1 in 2002 reflects that, depicting 3 panels stating, "I'm sick of flags, I'm sick of God, I've seen the power of faith," calling 9/11 ultimately an attack was an act of faith, controversial as that was. 9/11 would also influence Frank Miller when he returned to The Dark Knight Returns with the sequel, The Dark Knight Strikes Back, for which DC paid him $1 million up front. The story was meant as a satire. He deliberately made Batman into a terrorist who leads a rebellion against Lex Luthor's dictatorial rule over the United States, while his art got more cartoony. However, it did reflect his attitudes of 9/11, such as when Batman says at one point, "Striking terror, best part of the job." This was due to the fact that the series was plotted out before 9/11 happening, and Miller had to write his way out of the dicier parts once it was starting being released. Published from December of 2011 to July of 2002 for 3 issues, the series received mixed to negative reviews, with many considering it nowhere near the brilliance of the original Dark Knight Returns comic. Despite this reception, the series was still a financial success, with each issue selling at least 170,000 copies apiece. Miller still wasn't done with Batman, as he would return to the character once again with All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder, in 2005, with Jim Lee as the artist. According to Miller, it was set in the continuity of The Dark Knight Returns and covers this version of Batman recruiting Dick Grayson to become Robin, though in a near-criminal manner as he kidnaps and is even physically abusive toward Robin. It is also the comic that Batman utters the now infamous line, "I'm the GD Batman," that quickly became a joke among fans. While initial sales was strong, with the first issue selling 200,000 copies, critical and fan reaction, along with the erratic release schedule, 11 issues were released from 2005 to 2008, led to the comic being negatively viewed. Jim Lee would always claim the late releases were his fault, as Miller had completed his scripts, but Lee was just too busy with other duties at DC at the time. Around the same time, Frank Miller would also divorce his wife and longtime colorist Lynn Varley. Despite these disappointments in both his professional and personal life, Frank Miller would return to Hollywood after much convincing from director of From Dusk Till Dawn, Robert Rodriguez. Rodriguez was a huge fan of Sin City and wanted to make an adaptation of it, but Miller was reluctant from his previous experience with Hollywood, especially since that comic was his direct reaction to his problems with the industry. However, when Rodriguez made a short film of the story The Customer is Always Right, starring Josh Hartnett and Marley Shelton, and showed it to Miller, he was pleased and even agreed to co-direct the film with Robert Rodriguez, which forced Rodriguez to leave the Directors Guild of America when they refused. For some weird reason, both him and Miller can't have co-directing credit. Using the comic book as storyboards for the film, it not only incorporated the original short, but also The Hard Goodbye, The Big Fat Kill, and That Yellow Bastard into a sprawling film connecting all the stories, also just like the comic. Miller was surprised at Rodriguez's insistence that they shoot the whole comic. He would joke to Miller, "Sorry, Frank, you drew it, so we shoot it." But loved working with the actors, and as it was an all-star cast that consisted of Mickey Rourke, who would make his comeback with this role, Bruce Willis, and Clive Owen, who reportedly approached Miller over his love of Raymond Chandler, which inspired him thoroughly. To also capture the look of the comic, Rodriguez used extensive green screen that not only kept the cost down, the film was shot for $40 million over 45 days, but allowed the actors to not even be on the same set on the same day to act together. Miller would also throw a fun jab at his past work in RoboCops 2 and 3, when RoboCop's gun makes a brief cameo in the film. Released on April 1st of 2005, it was met with instant critical acclaim for its faithfulness to the comic, along with financial success, grossing $158.8 million worldwide. And it also revived Frank Miller's interest in Hollywood, and for better or worse, he decided to make a try at directing a movie by himself. In 2008, The Spirit was released on Christmas Day, adapting the classic Will Eisner comic for the big screen using the same film techniques from Sin City, which Frank Miller directed. Miller was a longtime fan of the character and his creator, comic book legend Will Eisner, and even in a book with him, Eisner Miller, in 2005, in which the two interviewed each other. Starring Gabriel Macht as the title character and Samuel L. Jackson as his archenemy, the Octopus, the film readapts his origin, giving him superhuman regenerative abilities. In the original comic book, the Spirit just faked his death. Despite an all-star cast also included Scarlett Johansson and Eva Mendes, the film was a financial and critical failure, grossing us $39 million against a $60 million budget. Frank Miller joked before the movie was released that the Spirit's creator, the late Will Eisner, wouldn't have liked the film, and probably even more so now. With the film's failure, it also ended Miller's plans to adapt the Buck Brothers into a movie, which was also shunted, and pretty much ended Frank Miller's directorial career. Still affected by the events of 9/11, Frank Miller proposed a Batman vs. Al-Qaeda comic called Holy Terror Batman, though DC shut that down in 2006. Miller continued to work on the project and by 2010 said it would be an original tale, this time having a superhero called the Fixer taking on Islamic terrorists after an attack on Empire City. Published on September 8, 2011, it will receive instant criticism for its critiques of Islam, with notable critics being Stan Lee and Grant Morrison, who attacked the story for simplifying the conflict with terrorism. Miller originally defended his book and also comments against the Occupy Wall Street, who he called a bunch of rapists and thieves, by pointing out we were at war with a dangerous enemy. However, by 2018, Miller would back away from both Holy Terror and those comments, stating that they came from a place of anger over 9/11, and while he can't remove chapters from his life, he was no longer capable of making something like Holy Terror ever again. Frank Miller will return to Sin City to the movies again with a sequel called The Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, which adapted the Dame to Kill For story along with the continuing stories from the first film. Both Miller and Rodriguez returned to directing along with most of the original cast, but the film, released on April 22, 2014, was met with mixed reviews and disappointing box office, grossing $39.4 million against a $65 million budget. Returning to comic books in 2015, Frank Miller made a third edition of the Dark Knight Returns story with The Dark Knight 3, The Master Race, which finds Batman and the other DC superheroes battling an invasion of Kryptonians. Miller wasn't alone in this comic, however, with Brian Azzarello joining him on writing duties, while Andy Kubert and Klaus Johnson helped with the art. Frank Miller also produced a series of one-shots he wrote and drew highlighting the different DC characters along with filling in the events between issues, as the series was meant to be bi-monthly. Released from November of 2015 to June of 2017, the 9-issue miniseries would be an instant hit, selling 440,234 copies on the first issue alone, along with receiving better reviews than the previous Dark Knight Strikes Back. Nevertheless, it was not considered a classic that Dark Knight Returns is, but it revived Miller's interest in doing a fourth miniseries, which is yet to be produced. On June 10th of 2015, Frank Miller was inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame and followed the completion of The Master Race. Frank Miller returned to work full-time as a writer-artist on Xerxes, The Fall of the House of Darius, and The Rise of Alexander, where it served as both a sequel and a prequel to his 300 miniseries. Published from April to August of 2018, the 5-issue miniseries follows Xerxes' rise as the Emperor of Persia, his invasion of Greece, and the eventual fall of Persia when Alexander the Great invades. Currently, Frank Miller is working on Superman Year One for DC under his Black Label, a prestige format comic that tells the origin of Superman of the Dark Knight Returns universe. He also provided art for Tom Wheeler's Cursed young adult novel, which tells the story of King Arthur from the perspective of the Lady of the Lake, which was picked up for a series for Netflix in 2018. The book was published in 2019, with the series supposed to be debuting in 2020. While Frank Miller has yet to recapture the heights of his work in the 1980s and 90s, he remains a viable creator still, and while his overall legacy cannot be denied. While many miss the point of his gritty adult stories in the works like Daredevil and The Dark Knight Returns, Miller remains one of the most important comic artists in recent decades, reviving not only Batman and Daredevil, but crime comic books and historical epics, reviving genres long neglected by the American comic book medium. There is only one Frank Miller, and the comic books are much better for him today. I would like to thank the chief source of these episodes, the Comics Journal Library, Frank Miller Interviews 1981 to 2003, which is a collection of the interviews that Frank Miller gave to the journal at the time. A great read for anyone wanting to look into the mind of Frank Miller. And now is January 8th, 2026, time for the favorite comic of the week. Batman, number 5, by Matt Fraction and Jorge Jimenez, which is a great issue that finds Bruce Wayne taking Dr. Zeller, who's he's trying to recruit for Wayne Enterprises, out on a date, only for some mysterious assassins to come after her, and he has to try to keep her alive while not letting her know that he's actually Batman. Fraction has a lot of fun with this issue. He's going more lighthearted talk with Batman, which is a nice twist on how dark the comic has been over the last few years, and especially since now he's in the blue and gray Batman suit, which is kind of indicative of being more lighthearted. It's just a lot of fun. It's great seeing Bruce Wayne showing off his skills as Batman while trying to also hide the fact who he is and maintaining his playboy persona. And it's matched by Jim Lemons' gorgeous art, which from the madcap action to the battles through Gotham and so forth, and also some nice humorous panels. This is just a lot of fun in general. Some of the most fun Batman in quite some time. Great read in general, and plus it has a great cliffhanger that shows that, well, maybe Bruce Wayne wasn't as good as hiding him being Batman as he thought, and just a great read in general. So yeah, definitely check that out. And with that, we will conclude with this archive edition of The Life of Frank Miller. Join me again next week, which might be an archive edition, or might be something a little new. We'll see. Something popped up that I might be able to deliver maybe a new classic and so forth. I'll let you go. But until then, go ahead and enjoy yourself a good comic book. And definitely check out Batman. If you want like a lighter, more fun run on Batman lately, you can't go much wrong with the current Matt Fraction run.